At the edge of the forest, where nature had already begun to assume a cloak of silence and peace, Ronnie stopped in front of a primitively constructed grave. A smile lit up her face, an involuntary gesture of greeting to the one who was no longer with them, Peter. There was sadness in the air, but also a kind of quiet resignation to the inevitable. Ronnie inhaled deeply, as if trying to capture in her heart the sense of the wildflowers she was so eager to share with Peter. Her voice shook as she began to speak of her desire to share this beauty with him, barely holding back the tears that came to her eyes. However, by force of will and a quick movement of her hand, she brushed them off as if trying to push away the sadness. At that moment, as Ronnie wrapped her arms around a makeshift cross of twigs, seeking solace and connection with her departed friend, a trio of boys suddenly approached her. There was something darker than accusation in their eyes. They hurled a wave of accusations at her, claiming that Ronnie had presumably resorted to stealing food again to enjoy it alone, hidden from everyone. The moment was full of tension when Ronnie's sad solitude in front of his friend's grave was abruptly interrupted by accusations, filling the air with a sense of misunderstanding and resentment. Faced with injustice and accusations, Ronnie bravely met the eyes of the boys, asserting her innocence. She insisted that her hands were clean from stealing, but her words were scattered in the air without finding understanding in the hearts of the accusers. A sharp jolt followed in response to her assertions, confirming the guys' distrust of her words. The gesture sent a wave of emotion through Ronnie, on the verge of tears that she barely held back, fighting for her dignity in this difficult situation. Addressing Ronnie as a boy only added spice to an already tense moment. The boys, not hiding their mistrust, decided to find out why Ronnie, who had originally said she was going to go to the toilet, had ended up in the forest. Their voices were full of accusations, suggesting that Ronnie had used this as an excuse to enjoy the allegedly stolen food in privacy. Suddenly, as the accusations reached their climax and the atmosphere of tension became almost unbearable, a voice cutting through the silence was heard from afar. It was a call that could not be delayed. The principal was summoning the children. This unexpected turn caused the boys to put aside their accusations, giving Ronnie a respite, albeit briefly, from the poignancy of the moment. The sudden interruption gave Ronnie a moment of peace, though it left unresolved questions and resentments hovering in the air. The moment the darkness of the office enveloped everyone who entered its confines, rows of children lined up like soldiers before an inspection. The headmaster, eyeing everyone with a keen eye, took a recount, making sure everyone he expected to see was present. His voice, stern and unobjectionable, told the children to remain silent and orderly, adding to the atmosphere of seriousness and expectation. In this mysterious and tense environment, Ronnie, standing among the others, suddenly came to a realization that pierced her sharper than a cold wind. When she looked around, she found that there were no girls in the room, only boys, like forgotten pieces on a chessboard, awaiting their fate. This realization came to her suddenly, wrapping her heart in a cold chill of foreboding and questioning. As the office door swung open again, another man entered the room whose arrival signaled a development. The headmaster, gaining a new confidence in his voice, announced that all the boys of the orphanage were assembled before them, as if it were a great gathering destined by fate. Following that statement, something happened that even the imagination could envy. Into the study, like a scene from a magical fairy tale, entered figures whose dress and manners left no doubt as to their origin. The aristocrats, every movement and look demonstrating their high position, like angels descended from the pages of ancient books, entered the room. Their presence instantly changed the atmosphere, bringing a sense of something sublime and unattainable, making everyone present feel a part of something bigger and more significant. In that impenetrable gloom of the study, where every shadow seemed like a lurking spirit of the past, and the air was saturated with expectation, the gentlemen, like characters from a fairy tale, began the search for their friend. Ronnie, standing among the others like an island in the midst of a stormy sea, understood the importance of this moment. The opportunity to be chosen meant not just an escape from the gray everyday life of the orphanage, but an immersion into a world of abundance and knowledge, a world where every day was not a struggle for survival, but rather a journey to new discoveries. The excitement that gripped her made her heart beat faster, as if trying to break free. This moment, with the future hanging in the balance, felt like an eternity. And then, amidst the tense anticipation and silent stares, an aristocrat, one of those whose presence filled the room with an aura of grandeur, noticed Ronnie's agitation. Her footsteps, light and graceful, cut through the silence, heading toward the girl. All eyes, as if drawn by an invisible force, focused on Ronnie as the noblewoman approached her. With the ease and tenderness that only those accustomed to the finer matters of the soul could muster, she smoothed Ronnie's hair, as if trying to smooth out her agitation as well. Her words, soft and soothing, were filled with understanding and care. In that moment, Ronnie felt not alone in this crowd of waiting people, but singled out, special. It was a moment when time slowed its run, and Ronnie's heart, though still pounding, now did so with hope. The moment the aristocrat touched Ronnie's world, the air in the room seemed to change its density, becoming lighter and warmer. But this moment of warmth was suddenly interrupted by the unexpected announcement of the aristocrat, who, gazing at Ronnie in surprise, mistook her for a particularly cute boy. This misconception, like a flash of lightning, illuminated Ronnie's reaction, causing her to fall into a deep stupor. In an attempt to rectify the situation and return the aristocrat's favor, Ronnie began to bow, overwhelmed with apologies, each one filled with immense anxiety and a desire to correct the misunderstanding. The aristocrat, with her natural grace and patience, urged the boy to cease his apologies, a note of appeasement and kindness in her voice. The age question, asked with ease and interest, was the next twist in their unusual dialogue. After learning that Ronnie was only 7 years old, the aristocrat, as if under the influence of a sudden insight, decided to take Ronnie with her. This decision, spoken with unwavering certainty, was a beacon of hope for Ronnie, a light at the end of a long and dark tunnel. Something changed inside her. Fear and uncertainty gradually gave way to a sense of beginning a new chapter in her life, a chapter full of promise and possibilities that had hitherto seemed out of reach. The aristocrat, who possessed not only nobility of blood but also refinement of manners, turned with interest to the young girl who, standing before her, felt a slight hesitation. After a short pause in which one could detect a slight hesitation, the girl introduced herself. Her name was Ronnie, and the name she said sounded so gentle and yet so determined that it made the noblewoman curious. As the sun began to slope toward dusk, coloring the sky in bright shades of orange and pink, Ronnie stepped across the threshold of her new room. It was something magical, the room bathed in the light of the fading day, the walls that seemed warm and inviting, and the furniture, refined and elegant, all combined to make her feel like she was in a fairy tale. The space was much more spacious and refined than the cramped confines of the orphanage where she had spent the last few years. Ronnie looked around and took in every detail, every object in this room with deep admiration. But despite the temptation to touch or rearrange something, she decided to leave everything as it was, untouched and perfect. The suddenness of the next moment only heightened the impression of what was happening. 2 maids came into Ronnie's room carrying dinner. Their appearance was so unexpected that even the air in the room seemed to become different, saturated with the aromas of delicious dishes. The maids looked at Ronnie with respect and a certain amount of bewilderment at the same time and informed her that they had been given orders to bathe her. These words, spoken in the spacious, bright room, awakened excitement mixed with bewilderment in Ronnie. She was well aware that a moment of bathing might reveal her true identity, and the fact that she was not a boy would become obvious to all. Realizing the complexity and sensitivity of the situation, Ronnie found the strength to say that she preferred to take care of her own hygiene on her own. Her words sounded so sincere and insistent that it was impossible to refuse. She begged the maids to allow her to do so, doing her best to convince them of her request. And how could they resist such sweetness and sincerity coming from Ronnie? In the end, her honesty and openness won them over. As a sign of support and understanding, one of the maids poured Ronnie a glass of juice, figuring it might help her calm down and gather her thoughts after the difficult conversation. Ronnie, feeling the looks of sympathy and support, hesitantly took the glass in her hands. At that moment, her eyes flashed with gratitude, mixed with a touch of nervousness. But suddenly, just as she touched the glass, its slippery surface slipped out of her hands and the glass shattered on the floor, breaking into many small shards and spilling juice all over the shiny floor. This moment seemed to stop time in the room, adding tension to an already quite emotionally charged atmosphere. Ronnie, standing among the scattered shards, felt a mix of feelings, from confusion to worry about possibly annoying the maids. The frightening incident with the broken glass instantly filled Ronnie with a sense of guilt and responsibility for what had happened. Heartbroken, she knelt down, trying to pick up the sharp shards that glittered on the floor like stars in the night sky, but far more dangerous and unpredictable. However, the maids, moved by concern for her well-being, rushed to stop her, and Ronnie covered herself in anger out of habit. But they were just afraid that in trying to fix the situation, Ronnie might hurt herself on the sharp edges of the shards, which would add more worries to this already difficult evening. When one of the maids suddenly offered to change Ronnie's soiled clothes, the girl's heart beat even harder. She realized that each new action, each new turn of events could inadvertently bring closer the moment when her deepest secret, her true identity, might be revealed. Her mind began to whirl again with thoughts of how she could avoid this situation without arousing suspicion or revealing her secret. This moment tested Ronnie not only on the strength of her ability to keep secrets, but also on her ingenuity in circumventing potentially dangerous situations that could expose her. When the maids carefully removed Ronnie's outer garments, a totally unexpected discovery awaited them. Standing before them was not a young boy, as they had assumed, seeing him for the first time, but a young girl. This moment filled the room with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of their own surprised breathing. Ronnie, feeling the looks of bewilderment and questions on her face, closed her eyes, letting the memories transport her back in time. The image of a cold winter evening flashed vividly in her mind, when the world around her seemed consumed by an endless silence, broken only by occasional gusts of wind. Her mother, standing on the threshold of their modest home, looked at Ronnie with deep seriousness and anxiety in her eyes. Just before saying goodbye, in a low, barely audible voice, she gave Ronnie a covenant that was to determine the rest of the girl's life. "No one can know you're a girl," the mother whispered as she gazed into her daughter's face, sincerely hoping those words would resonate in her heart. It was to remain a little secret between them, a secret that Ronnie had pledged to keep until the day they met, despite any trials and obstacles that might come her way. This moment of parting was not just a word of caution to Ronnie, but a beacon to guide her through dark times, reminding her of the importance of masking her true self from a world that might not accept her for who she was. From then on, every day for Ronnie was a test of courage and ingenuity, for she had to not only hide her identity, but also learn to live in a guise that the world deemed acceptable to her. Now that her secret had been unwittingly revealed to the maids, Ronnie felt a wave of anxiety come over her, making her wonder about the future and what trials awaited her next in this difficult life full of secrets and masks. One of the maids, feeling the weight of the moment's responsibility, approached the aristocrats with a burning question. She doubted that Ronnie had deliberately concealed her gender and asked them with some uncertainty about how to proceed. The aristocrats, after a brief discussion, agreed that it was necessary to personally interact with the girl before making any decisions. The maid, having been instructed, quietly left the room, leaving the aristocrats in a state of deep thought. After she left, a silence hung in the air, broken only by the barely perceptible rustle of clothing and quiet breathing. The faces of the aristocrats, usually so impenetrable and self-assured, were suddenly clouded with embarrassment and confusion. The unexpectedness of the situation made them forget their high position for a moment and feel like they were facing something unpredictable that knocked them out of their usual rhythm of life. At this time, Ronnie was in her room, huddled in a corner as if trying to make herself invisible to the world outside those walls. She was gripped by a feeling of utter loss, not knowing how to deal with the situation. With each passing minute, her heart filled with more and more anxiety, and her eyes filled with tears despite her stubborn resistance. Her thoughts swirled chaotically in her head, like leaves lifted by a whirlwind. Ronnie felt the weight of the very secret she'd worked so hard to hide, and now that she was close to exposing it, she felt her world begin to crumble. Fearful at the prospect of returning to the orphanage, Ronnie could not find a place to sit. Her anxious thoughts were suddenly interrupted when the maids entered the room. Their faces lit up with smiles, and they turned affectionately to Ronnie, inviting her to follow them into the bathroom. Surprise stiffened Ronnie for a moment. She hadn't expected this turn of events. But then, feeling the caring hands of the maids, found herself led to a place where she was about to experience something completely new. The spacious bathroom seemed to Ronnie like something from another world. The huge bathtub, filled to the brim with warm water, beckoned to her with its promise of unknown comfort and relaxation. As Ronnie sank into the water, she felt the tension leave her body, giving way to a feeling of bliss and peace. The water enveloped her like the softest silk, and the warmth penetrated to the very depths of her being, promising oblivion. The maids bustled around the bathtub, creating a halo of attention and care around Ronnie. They scurried about, taking care of every detail so that the bath would be as pleasant as possible for the girl. This moment felt like a small miracle, a bright ray of light in her complicated life. But deep down, she couldn't shake the guilt of having deceived the dukes. Suddenly, the maids came up with the task of helping the young lady with the water procedures. But Ronnie, accustomed to privacy and some independence, met them with undisguised reluctance. Disregarding her silent protest, one of the maids, with motherly tenderness and care, took Ronnie's hand. At that moment, she discovered that the girl's skin was covered in bruises, as if the delicate rose petals had been abraded by rough raindrops. This discovery explained their sudden understanding of the reasons why Ronnie insisted on having privacy while bathing. However, the water procedures had to be finished, and with a stone on their hearts, the maids began to sponge the distraught girl. After the water procedures were completed and Ronnie was neatly dressed, the maids, now aware of her secret grief, escorted her to the dukes. Before them stood Ronnie, whose exterior was flawless, but within her emotions raged. The dukes, in their splendor and nobility, seemed pleased with the sight before them. But suddenly, overwhelmed with inner turmoil and a sense of unbearable heaviness, Ronnie fell to her knees before them, as if seeking comfort or forgiveness in their presence. The Duchess, possessing intuition and a deep understanding of the human soul, approached Ronnie. She reassured the trembling girl by gently declaring that no reproach would follow. This gesture of the Duchess was filled not only with mercy, but also support, which was a ray of light for Ronnie in the dark realm of her worries. In that moment, the whole world seemed to freeze in anticipation, watching how kindness and understanding can awaken hope in even the hardest heart. When Ronnie finally regained her fortitude and stood before the dukes, filled with newfound confidence and nobility, her appearance caused the dukes nothing but mortification. They looked at her with tenderness and joy, appreciating every feature of her lovely face, every gesture of the gentle and noble person. At that moment, the entire room seemed to be filled with light and warmth emanating from the Duke's pride and admiration. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes with the arrival of Andrea, the Duke's son, who does not hide his irritation and complains to his parents. His words were full of rejection of the idea of having a friend, the very comrade he felt he didn't need at all. In that moment, Ronnie realized that she had been drawn here for this very role, to be a companion for Andy, a bridge between his closed world and the rest of the world. When Andy's gaze fell on Ronnie, his reaction was unexpected. He was embarrassed to see not just a girl, but someone who, in his eyes, seemed more like a dainty doll purchased especially for him. This moment was full of misunderstanding and at the same time opening new horizons for both of them. Ronnie, standing in front of Andy, represented not only the possibility of friendship but also a challenge to his inner beliefs, questioning his ideas about what he needed to be happy. The scene in the Duke's Hall turned into a moment of genuine human warmth and unexpected discovery. The Dukes and the maid, trying to hold back a wave of mirth, hid their smiles behind propriety as they watched Andy's naive amazement. It was like a moment when adults witness the pure innocence and openness of a child's perception of the world, which made the situation even more touching and funny at the same time. When Ronnie boldly and directly declared her humanity, Andy was struck to the core. His dumbfounded expression said that the world he had known up to that point had suddenly expanded. The Duchess, barely containing her laughter, decided to set the stage by explaining to her son the scheme she and the Duke had conceived. They wanted to give Andy a friend from the orphanage so that he could find a companion. The irony that this friend turned out to be a girl added a special charm and depth to the situation. Ronnie, feeling embarrassed and realizing how much this new place in the ducal family's life meant to her, bowed in apology to Andy. Her plea not to be rejected was full of sincerity and a desire to find her place in this new world. Andy, initially confused and not wanting a friend, suddenly felt a surge of unexpected feelings. The idea that Ronnie could become not just a friend but a sister ignited a spark of joy in his heart and the possibility of a new, unrecognized relationship. It was a moment of awakening for Andy when he realized that a family can grow not only through blood ties but through deep emotional bonds that are built on mutual understanding, support, and unconditional love. At this moment in time, as excitement and hope mingled in the air, Andy made an unexpected move, pleading to his father that Ronnie stay with them. His heart was full of a sincere desire to protect his new friend, which made his request all the more touching. Ronnie, on the cusp of a new life, suddenly found herself in the spotlight, overwhelmed with emotion and uncertainty about the future. She was stunned, especially after hearing Andy say that he liked her and thought she was cute. Those words sounded like music to her, filled with the promise of friendship and acceptance. However, The sudden change of heart was brought by the Duke, whose word in the family was decisive. His voice, which abruptly interrupted all conversation, brought a note of tension and uncertainty to the room. With the words that he had already learned enough about Ronnie, the Duke put an end to this discussion by sending the girl to her room. Ronnie, barely holding back tears, felt a weight of despair and lostness. The thought crept into her heart that perhaps she had let herself hope for the best too soon, that dreams of friendship and a new family might remain unspoken wishes. Amidst a tense conversation filled with anxiety and anticipation, the Duchess turned to her husband with excitement in her voice. She urged him not to jump to conclusions and decisions about their little ward, Ronnie, who fate had thrown into their lives. The Duchess expressed deep concern for the girl's future, arguing that returning Ronnie to the orphanage could cause her a great deal of trouble and hardship that she certainly did not deserve. The Duke, a man with an unbending character and a strict outlook on life, very strictly, so that his words sounded like thunder, suddenly and sharply, making the hearts of the Duchess and their son freeze with shock. The sternness in his voice made it clear that he saw no alternative to his decision, which seemed to finally and irrevocably decide little Ronnie's fate. However, as if the clouds parted to reveal a clear blue sky, the next moment there was an unexpected turn. The Duke, as if realizing the depth of his feelings and seeing the situation from a different angle for the first time, changes the tone of his voice. With amazement and slight embarrassment in his voice, he admits that it is impossible to deny the charm and directness of Ronnie, who has undoubtedly won his heart. In this moment, a new facet of his personality is revealed, showing his capacity for deep emotions and attachments. The Duke's sudden realization of his desire to welcome Ronnie into his family as his daughter is the climax of this dramatic and touching story. It was a testament to how love and affection can change even the most stable beliefs and attitudes, paving the way for a new chapter in the life of this extraordinary family. The moment the Duke solemnly announced that Ronnie could stay to live in their home, the air was filled with a sense of relief and joy. The Duchess, the model of an exemplary mother and caring wife, could not hide her delight, and their son Andy was gripped with excitement and embarrassment at the same time. The thought that he would now have a sister made his face blush with tender excitement and anticipation of the new, happy changes in their family life. However, despite this wave of positive emotions, the Duchess, who has a sharp mind and sensitive heart, raised an important issue. She had, not without a share of surprise, asked her husband a penetrating question about why, despite wanting to keep Ronnie with them, he continued to maintain some emotional distance from her. The Duke, usually so sure of himself and his actions, seemed confused this time. His attempt to explain his actions by wanting to give Ronnie time to rest because she seemed tired sounded unconvincing even to him. But Andy, young and direct, brought clarity by pointing out how unpleasant and even frightening his father's face looked as he spoke those words to Ronnie. This moment was a revelation to everyone. Behind the facade of austerity and determination of the Duke hid deep, perhaps even contradictory feelings, which he himself had not yet fully understood or did not want to recognize. When the maid, with excitement in her voice, shared with Ronnie the news that she would no longer have to leave this house and that she was becoming a full member of the family, the little girl's little heart was filled with incredible joy. But along with her joy came a question that seemed insurmountable. How could she, as a girl, be a true friend to Andy? After all, in her mind, friendship between boys and girls seemed like something out of the ordinary. Even so, the excitement and happiness of not having to return to the orphanage outweighed any doubts. The maid, meanwhile, could not hide her bewilderment at the Duke's decision to leave Ronnie behind. Her eyes, full of mixed feelings, slid over Ronnie now and then, as if trying to discern in her the elusive trait that had enabled the girl to win such a place in this house. Ronnie, for her part, feeling awkward and eager to prove her usefulness, hastily declared that she was ready to take on any job, be it cleaning or tending the flowers, and would do her best to justify the trust placed in her. The maid, however, reacted unexpectedly, assuring Ronnie that she was capable of handling everything herself and her help would not be needed. These words stunned Ronnie, but no sooner had she recovered than she heard even more alarming news. The Duke himself was soon to come to her. The thought of meeting him filled her heart with anxiety. The Duke had always seemed to her unapproachable and austere, as if he were the embodiment of justice and power, and in her imagination he was almost like an evil giant from fairy tales, before whom all in his domain trembled. In that moment, Ronnie felt excitement and fear mingle in her soul, leaving little room for the joy of being part of this noble family now. The maid was about to leave, declaring that Ronnie had nothing to worry about. But after she spoke her soothing words, leaving Ronnie alone with her worries and hopes, the air in the room suddenly became tense in anticipation of the upcoming meeting. A sudden knock at the door sent the girl into a panic, and remembering the instinctive habits she had acquired at the orphanage, she hid as best she could behind the bed, trembling with fear and the unknown of what awaited her. Entering the room with a friendly question filled with genuine concern for whether Ronnie was well rested, the Duke felt a thrill when he didn't find the girl where he expected. This embarrassment only increased when the maid, with a note of restrained surprise in her voice, pointed to the place where the fear-shaking Ronnie was hiding. Realizing the depth of fear and uncertainty that gripped the girl, the Duke, with the intention of showing his kindness and understanding, knelt down before her. The gesture, meant to smooth the distance between his majestic status and her humble origins, made Ronnie freeze. Brought up in the strictness and regulations of the orphanage, she stood motionless, steady, assuming the posture she had been instilled with as a show of respect and submission, trying not to show any emotion, though the strongest feelings raged within her. This moment was a test for both Ronnie and the Duke, as they both found themselves facing their inner fears and prejudices, trying to find a way to understand and accept each other in this unexpected union of fate. In an atmosphere filled with silence and anticipation, the Duke turned to Ronnie to ask if she had finally gotten a good night's rest. Ronnie, gripped by sudden consternation but feeling somewhat relieved at the same time, hurriedly nodded in affirmation. There was gratitude in her eyes, and, embarrassed at her earlier ingratitude, she expressed her sincere apologies and gratitude for the generosity and kindness the Duke had shown in allowing her to remain under his protective wing. The Duke, weighing her words thoughtfully, could not help but reflect on the trials and hardships this little soul had gone through in her short 7 years. What made her so afraid of those around her, so eager for solitude and peace? His heart clenched at the thought of her earlier ordeal. With a slight embarrassment in his voice, he hastened to assure Ronnie that his visit was not intended to seek an apology for his unspoken gratitude. His gaze softened and a smile appeared on his face, full of warmth and care. He dropped words full of significance and the promise of a new beginning. He wished to give the girl a new name, symbolizing the new life and new hopes that lay ahead of her. The Duchess's heart began to think that the name Ronnie carried a rather masculine connotation, and she expressed her opinion that a new name should be chosen for the girl, one more suitable and reflective of her delicate nature. She shared her reflections with the Duke, who, as it turned out, had long cherished in his heart the name intended for his future firstborn. It was a name full of warmth and love, a name that hid the story of an unborn dream, and now he wanted to bestow it on Ronnie. The Duke, laden with slight embarrassment and filled with paternal concern, knelt before the girl. His hand slid affectionately over her head as he solemnly announced that from now on, her name would be Rosny Evelyn. It was like a magic key that opened the door to a new world where she would have a special place. Rosny, repeating her new name, was wrapped in a layer of uncertainty, as if she were trying on a new dress, not yet sure if it fit her. The Duke, noticing her hesitation, became anxious, fearing that the choice did not please the girl. His fears were dispelled, however, when Rosny smiled through her doubts and expressed her delight at the new name. Her smile was like a ray of light breaking through the clouds of uncertainty, confirming that the name had indeed found its mistress. Rosny, feeling the warmth and acceptance she had missed for so long, turned to the Duke with gratitude, expressing her feelings for the beautiful name he had given her. The Duke, for his part, seemed to feel slightly embarrassed by the attention he was receiving and decided to direct his thoughts to the next important step, settling Rosny into her new home. He instructed the maid to put the girl in Sophia's room, which gave her a real shock. This order seemed so unexpected that the maid was for a moment speechless, not believing her ears. The Duke, oblivious to her reaction, continued on his way, reassuring Rosny and assuring her that everything in Sophia's room was already prepared for her to move in. The maid, left alone with this news, could not hide her displeasure. It was not easy for her to accept the idea that the Duke's younger sister's room, which had always been a model of family warmth and closeness, would now be given to a stranger, as she had involuntarily mentally dubbed Rosny. Suddenly the Duke stopped, as if something important had occurred to him that he needed to say right here and now. The maid, catching this pause, began to rejoice in her heart, supposing that the Duke might have changed his mind, but her hopes were in vain. The Duke, turning to Rosny, and again touching the moment of slight embarrassment that was so characteristic of him at this moment, gently announced that as a token of their special affection, they would call the girl Roro. This moment took the maid as much by surprise as the previous order to move in. It emphasized not only Rosny's acceptance into the family, but also the Duke's special attitude to her, showing his readiness to bring her into his circle of friends under such a touching and intimate nickname. So the thought began to grow in the hearts of everyone present, even the most skeptical, that Rosny had indeed become part of their large and extraordinary family. In the silence of the orphanage, a piercing scream was suddenly heard, which instantly penetrated every corner of the building, causing alarm among its occupants. At the center of what was happening was a man whose voice overrode all other sounds. He accused Ronnie of stealing the food, loudly expressing his outrage. She held tightly to her aching cheek, desperately trying to assure the man of her innocence, but her words seemed useless in the face of his intransigence. Little Ronnie, gripped with fear and bewilderment, cried, trying to shield her face from further blows. As she tossed and turned in her bed, she sank into the world of her memories, which seemed so vivid and alive in her dreams. Her dreams replayed scenes from the past, reviving long-forgotten moments. Above her, like a guardian, stood a maid who disapprovingly remarked that the girl was spending too much time in bed. She decided it was time to break the endless sleep and wake Roro. When the maid touched the sleeping woman, she jumped up suddenly, as if from a spring, startling her. Roro felt her heart race and her breathing become heavy and ragged from the suddenness of this awakening. The maid, despite her consternation, quickly got down to business, reminding Roro that it was time to get up and get ready for a new day. "Time to wash up," she announced sternly. The little girl, trying to recover from her morning fright, obediently jumped off the bed, ready to follow the daily routine. At that moment, despite all the vicissitudes of fate, each of the girls in her own way tried to find her place in this orphanage, experiencing both the joys and sorrows that life presented to them. Roro awoke on this particular day feeling an unusual excitement and joy flowing through her mind. She couldn't believe her luck when the morning water for washing was suddenly brought to her room, as if enveloping her in an atmosphere of luxury and care completely unknown to her until that moment. Everything around her seemed like something from another fairy tale world, where she, an ordinary girl, suddenly gained the status of the daughter of a great duke. It was like a dream from which she was afraid to wake up. Meanwhile, the maid who was tasked with taking care of Roro had very different feelings. To her, the task of keeping an eye on a girl who yesterday had seemed her social equal seemed ridiculous and even burdensome. She couldn't hide her displeasure when, showing her disdain, she threw a towel right in Roro's face, ordering her to hurriedly change her clothes. Roro, for her part, was struck by the beauty and elegance of the dress that was brought to her. It seemed to her the embodiment of her deepest dreams, a symbol of the new, incredible life she was now to live. But along with the admiration, a distrust of her own good fortune was brewing in her heart. "Can I, a girl of no origin, wear such a dress?" she thought, unable to take her eyes off the splendid garment. When the maid, not hiding her irritation, asked sharply if Roro could handle changing clothes on her own, the girl felt a sudden attack of fear. Panic flashed in her eyes, for until this moment she had never encountered such attention to her person and such a luxurious closet. This moment was a test for Roro, opening the door to a new life full of unknowns and yet promising many wonderful discoveries. After the maid, hiding her displeasure, finally left the room, leaving Roro alone with the incredible dress, the air in the room seemed filled with anticipation. Roro stood motionless, as if fascinated, staring at the magnificent outfit before her. She felt lost, for she had never seen anything like it before. How does this dress get put on? What intricate ties and clasps would she have to master? The question swirled in her head when suddenly loud shouts came from the hallway, cutting through the silence. Andy burst into the room like a hurricane. Her brother, whose appearance was a beacon in a sea of doubt and indecision for Roro. The maid who followed him expressed her disapproval of such unceremonious behavior, insisting that even at such a moment one must observe etiquette and knock. But Andy, eager to help his sister, paid no attention to her words. His action was driven not just by brotherly love, but by the realization that Roro needed support at such an important time. The maid, trying to restore some order, turned her attention to mundane matters, asking Roro if she had slept well. Roro, barely recovering from the initial shock and joy of her brother's sudden appearance, answered her with a nod. The moment, though seemingly fleeting, was filled with a deep sense of understanding and familial bond. When the room was relatively quiet after Andy's tumultuous appearance, the maid, with a sudden concern, noticed the numerous bruises covering Roro's body. Her look of concern made even Andy wonder about her sister's condition. But Roro, trying to remain steadfast and independent, hastened to assure them both that she was all right, addressing Andy with distanced respect as young master. This, in turn, made the brother sad and misunderstood, for he wished for a warmer, brotherly relationship for himself, not a formal treatment. Deciding to respect Roro's space and need for personal time to change, Andy left the room despite his slight resentment. Now that Roro was alone with just the maid, she found the courage to ask her not to talk about her bruises anymore. This moment, though filled with complicated emotions, showed an unexpected understanding between Roro and the maid. The maid showed her agreement and offered her assistance in dressing. Roro, feeling the weight of the maid's gaze, felt not just the obligation to hide traces of her past, but the realization that in this new world she might find allies even among those from whom she least expected support. As Roro took her seat at the lavishly laid table in the dining room, she could not hide her surprise and admiration at the abundance and variety of dishes that spread out before her eyes like a colorful culinary carpet, skillfully woven from the most exquisite and appetizing ingredients. The Duchess, noticing the bewilderment and shyness in the girl's eyes, shared with a slight smile that she had found it difficult to choose the dishes, as she was not sure of Roro's gastronomic preferences, and as a result had decided to prepare such a wide variety to be sure to please the girl. Such abundance and attention made Roro feel slightly embarrassed and grateful for such a warm and welcoming reception. The Duchess, showing her concern, did not miss the opportunity to inquire how Roro had spent her first night in her new room, eager to make sure the girl felt at home and in no need of anything. At the same time, Andy, eager to show his concern for his new sister and do his part in helping her adjust to life in their home, unobtrusively put more meat on her plate. Andy delicately emphasized that it could only be enjoyed to the fullest if tasted whole, without separating anything, and waited for Roro's reaction. It was a gesture of support and an attempt to establish a brother-sister relationship over the dinner table. Roro, in the midst of such attention and delicacy, felt herself part of something very warm and sincere. The excitement of her first encounter with such luxury, and her anxiety about how to behave properly so as not to appear ungrateful or clumsy, made her somewhat hesitantly pick up her fork and carefully stick it into the piece of meat Andy had so thoughtfully offered her. As Roro began her meal, the Duchess and Andy watched her with undisguised amusement and warmth in their eyes. Their gazes were full of care and tenderness, and for a moment they both felt an irresistible urge to caress the girl's cheeks, a reflection of their inner admiration and affection for her. When Roro finally tasted the meat, her face lit up with surprise and delight at its exquisite flavor, which did not go unnoticed by the rest of the family. Andy, with some smugness and pride in his contribution to Roro's culinary discovery, pompously declared that she should henceforth take his advice, emphasizing her part in this small but significant success. In response to his statement, the Duchess, not missing an opportunity to banter with her son, pointed out that Andy shouldn't allow himself to be too picky about food either, if he wanted to maintain his status as a trusted advisor to Roro. She also noticed with a smile that Roro's appetites were much better developed than her own son's, making a slight comparison between the children, which added even more warmth and friendliness to the atmosphere. Andy, for his part, not offended by his mother's good-natured teasing, deftly turned the conversation in another direction, focusing on Roro. He advised her to roll up her sleeves so she wouldn't get them dirty while eating. This advice was given with the lightness and playfulness characteristic of brotherly caring, emphasizing his desire to help Roro adapt to her new circumstances and feel as comfortable as possible in their home. When Andy, with the intention of helping, gently took Roro's hand to gently roll up her sleeve, he suddenly stopped as if lightning had struck him. His eyes widened in shock when he saw the many bruises covering her skin. Those marks on Roro's arms seemed like a cry for help that had gone unnoticed until that moment. Despite Roro's attempt to hide her hand, ashamed and not knowing how to explain the origin of those bruises, Andy held her hand, determined to understand what was behind these silent witnesses to her past. In the morning, as the first rays of the sun barely touched the earth, creating a soft light that slowly awakened the world from its night's sleep, Roro was on her way, nestled in the depths of a luxurious carriage. The air was filled with the coolness of dawn, and the world around seemed full of impenetrable silence, diluted only by the light creaking of wheels and the steady stomping of horses. Roro, despite the coziness and warmth inside the carriage, rubbed her eyes from time to time, trying to shake off the last vestiges of sleep that had been so cruelly interrupted by the early rise. The Duke, seated opposite, watched the scene with love and affection. His eyes were full of concern and paternal warmth as he watched Roro, still very young and unaccustomed to such an early start to the day, struggle to cope with her morning drowsiness. Suddenly, as if wanting to ease her through this little ordeal, he turned to her. His voice was soft and comforting, cutting through the silence that enveloped them. Holding out a handkerchief to her, he offered her a more gentle way of grooming herself, as if to remind her that she was not alone now and was being cared for. Roro felt more than just concern for her physical comfort as she took the handkerchief. It was a gesture of deep meaning and delicacy, reflecting the Duke's selfless care and attention to her, the newest member of his family. The moment the Duke remembered how Roro had begged him not to return her to the orphanage, his heart clenched in pain. Those words that she was vile and that this luxurious mansion was not for her echoed in his head, causing sharp pain and sympathy. He was shocked by the sincerity and desperation in her voice, and the tears on her face were like a living reminder of the depth of her fears and insecurities. Taking advantage of the intimacy of the carriage, where they were alone together, and the atmosphere was conducive to open conversation, the Duke decided to ask Roro a question that had long plagued him. He wondered if she would be scared if he actually decided to return her to the orphanage because the principal might hit her. The question caused Roro to be visibly afraid, which only confirmed his suspicions of the terror she was experiencing at the thought of returning. Wanting to allay her fears and test how deeply ingrained her ideas about adults and their attitudes toward children were, Duke asked if she thought he looked like someone who might threaten or hit her. Roro's reaction was immediate and emotional. She shouted that he didn't look at all like he couldn't believe that the man in front of her could hurt her. The Duke's voice was filled with concern and worry as he asked a question that could change the little girl's fate. He was looking for confirmation of the rumors that Roro might be feeling unwanted and fearing that she might be rejected. The Duke, noting this with deep compassion, offered her an alternative: to find a place where she would feel more welcome and happy, a place where she could be truly cared for. However, his heart was full of hope that Roro would choose to stay in their home, in their family. He expressed his desire for Roro to stay with them as long as she wished, emphasizing that her happiness was his priority. These words, imbued with genuine concern and offering a choice, touched Roro's heart deeply. Suddenly intertwined with the warmth of his words, reality reminded itself as the carriage they were in slowly pulled up to a place that brought back memories of the past for Roro, her former orphanage. This place, filled with the echoes of days gone by, caused Roro to struggle internally. On the one hand, the Duke's words gave her warmth and hope for a future where she would be loved and protected. On the other hand, the sight of the former orphanage, the walls of which held heavy memories, stirred fear in Roro's soul. This fear wasn't just a fear of change, it was a fear of losing her found happiness again and feeling alone in a world where so much seemed uncertain. The director of the orphanage, the epitome of austerity and order, suddenly saw the arrival of a dignified guest. His surprise turned to deep reverence when he learned that the Duke himself had arrived on his doorstep. With amazement and at the same time with joy, the headmaster bowed, welcoming such a noble guest. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the carriage, Roro remained invisible to those around her, racked with uncertain feelings. She hesitated to show her face, preferring to hide from view, fearful of impending change or possible return to the walls that had once been her home. The headmaster, seeing the silhouette in the carriage and making a naive mistake, expressed the assumption that the Duke had come to make a friend for his daughter, already seeing in this event a reason for joy. However, his joy was quickly dampened when he turned his attention to Roro. In the past, he had mistaken her for a boy named Ronnie. Seeing her in her dress, he could not refrain from criticizing her, expressing his disapproval of such a violation of his ideas of order. At that moment, the Duke interceded for Roro with a determination that did not tolerate objections. His words were weighty and stern as he pointed out clearly and unequivocally that Roro was a girl. The Duke's gaze, full of dignity and authority, left the orphanage director no choice but to apologize for his misunderstanding and inappropriate words. This moment not only brought clarity to the issue of Roro's gender in the face of the headmaster's outdated views, but also emphasized that the Duke is Roro's protector and protector, willing to take her side in the face of injustice or misunderstanding. In this tense moment when emotions were running high, the orphanage director, as if looking for an excuse for his misunderstanding and strict attitude, spoke up about Roro. He accused her of deceit, claiming that despite all his attempts at parenting, she remained as unruly as she was. His words sounded like a verdict he considered irrefutable, unwilling to see anything but disobedience behind the girl's behavior. At this moment, the Duke, who was standing in defense of Roro, caught the deep injustice in those words. As he looked at Roro, he truly realized why he felt the need to protect her. His hand on her head was a gesture of support and concern. In his heart, he was sure that he was not just a child, but an exceptionally sweet and lovely person, capable of deep gratitude and pure feelings. The Duke, as if sensing Roro's unspoken fears, assured her that she need not be afraid. His words were determined to protect her from any threat. However, in the midst of this protective charge, the headmaster, not holding back his emotions, shouted a threat of punishment for Roro, which was the last straw of patience. In response to his words, Roro, unable to contain her accumulated emotions any longer, burst into a desperate scream. Tears spattered from her eyes as she cried out the terrible truth she had been holding in, the death of her friend Peter, which had happened because of the principal's fault. Those words, spoken through the air like a bolt of lightning, illuminated the depth of the tragedy that Roro's little soul was facing and showed the true face of what was happening outside the walls of the orphanage. The principal shouted that it was nonsense, but the Duke sternly stated that the principal was too brave to do such a thing in his duchy. In that moment, when the Duke intervened, defending Roro from the unjust accusation and cruelty of the headmaster, his true nobility and strength was shown. His determination and actions demonstrate a deep justice and willingness to protect the innocent in his duchy. The arrest of the orphanage director by the guards under his command was a powerful sign that abuse and cruelty will not be tolerated in his domain. Roro, for the first time in a long time, felt heard and protected. The Duke had taken her word for it without demanding proof, which was a miracle in itself. His faith in her words and willingness to act in her defense gave Roro a sense of security and belonging that she had been deprived of for so long. The return to the manor was filled with warmth and care. The Duchess and Andy, upon meeting them, surrounded Roro with attention and love, creating a contrast to the coldness and indifference she had experienced at the orphanage. Andy, by caring for Roro like a sister and ignoring even his father in his desire to make sure Roro is okay, shows the depth of the bond that has developed between the children. The moment when the Duchess embraced her children symbolizes not only Roro's physical return, but her final acceptance into the family. It was a gesture that united them as one, confirming that Roro was no longer alone, that she now had a family to support and protect her. The Duchess leaned affectionately toward Roro to whisper words full of tenderness and acceptance. There was something magical in her voice as she spoke of how sweet and worthy of love this child was. Roro, standing beside her, felt a wave of incredible emotion wash over her heart. It was almost unimaginable to her that such noble and kind men as the Dukes could receive her so warmly and unconditionally, caring for her as if she were their own daughter. This moment was the epitome of the sincere love and acceptance she had been searching for. Tears welled up in her eyes, a testament to the profound feelings that swept over Roro. She clung to the Duchess, seeking comfort and warmth in her arms. At that moment, time seemed to stand still, and the whole universe was reduced to this moment of sincere emotion and boundless gratitude. Unbeknownst to them, Andy approached, trying to hide his own tears caused by the powerful flood of familial feelings sweeping over him at that moment. His gaze, full of concern and excitement, searched Roro's eyes for confirmation that she was indeed all right. His answer was Roro's warm, reassuring smile, which, like a beacon in a dark night, confirmed to him that now, being in this family, they had both found the very place where they were promised happiness and well-being. Thus, this day was a turning point in Roro's life, a moment when she found not just protection, but a family that loves and appreciates her for who she is. That evening, as the soft light of the lamp illuminated Roro's room, creating coziness and warmth, the Duchess sat beside the bed on which little Roro lay. Gently and caringly, she smoothed the girl's short hair, as if trying to convey all her love and care through this gesture. Looking at Roro's lovely features, the Duchess mentally imagined how the girl's hair would eventually grow to her shoulders, giving her even more charm and cuteness. These moments of silence and stillness were filled with warmth and peace. Then, with care and attention, the Duchess took the healing solution prepared for Roro's skincare into her hands. Carefully removing the girl's sweater, she couldn't hide her grief and compassion at the sight of the bruises and abrasions covering Roro's frail body. The sight reminded her of the difficult past the little girl had to endure. Suddenly, seeking to understand what circumstances had caused Roro to hide her true identity, the Duchess asked about Roro's reasons for pretending to be a boy in the orphanage. Roro's answer was simple, yet poignantly sad. She said that her mother had asked her to do so before the parting, as if she had a premonition that such an image would protect her from the dangers of the difficult world of the orphanage. This response revealed to the Duchess the depth of a mother's love and care, who sought to protect her child even in separation, even when she herself could not be there. Realizing this awakened in the Duchess an even greater sense of compassion and determination to protect Roro from all harm, giving her the security and love that had been sorely lacking in her life up to that point. That evening, filled with warm embraces and heartfelt words, the Duchess gave Roro a firm and gentle hug. She spoke words filled with love and acceptance. "Now you don't have to hide behind your boy mask. We love you just the way you are." Those words sounded like a melody to Roro, freeing her from years of wandering and loneliness, as if telling her that she had found her true home, where she was appreciated and loved for her true self. At dawn the next day, as the first rays of sunlight softly penetrated the room, the Duke gave Roro more than just words of comfort. He provided her with an official document, a testament to her new, protected, and respected life. This ID card not only confirmed her identity, but also stated that the Duke was now her legal guardian until the day she came of age. The document stated her full name, Rosny Evelyn Clave. The Duke lovingly explained that Clave was her family name, a name that Roro would feel more secure in her life's journey, a symbol of history strong and meaningful. Inspired and lit up with hope, Roro's determination and enthusiasm ignited. She said she would do her best to live up to the trust and love of her new family. Roro promised to learn writing and anything else the Duke saw fit to teach her. It was not just a promise to learn new skills, but a sign of deep gratitude and a desire to become a worthy part of his new family, whose support and faith in her had been a true gift of destiny for Roro. The Duke turned to Roro with a question that sounded more like an easy test of her readiness for her new life. He asked if she was willing to do whatever he said, to which the girl, full of determination and trust, responded with a nod. In response to her silent assent, the Duke put forward his first order, which was more of a kind offer than a demand. He said she should go off to play, not without participating by pointing out that Andy, her new brother, was already looking forward to seeing her so they could spend time together. Placing his hand on her head as a sign of paternal care and affection, Duke emphasized that Roro's job, like all children, was to play and enjoy life. It was a reminder that despite all the trials she had been through, she could now allow herself to just be a child, enjoy the moment, and find the carefree spirit that had been denied to her for so long. Following this order, Roro, feeling light and joyful, ran to meet the new adventures that awaited her ahead. This moment became a symbol of her new life, where not only lessons and learning were waiting for her, but also the boundless happiness of childhood, games, and, of course, new friends. As the golden rays of the sun caressed the earth, creating a mottled kaleidoscope on the green grass, Andy, immersed in the serenity of nature, decided to share his reflections. He, with ease and ease, expressed his joy at Roro's company, accompanied by an offer to join him in fully enjoying the tranquility of nature, lying side by side on the grass. Roro, taking the suggestion with respect and slight formality and calling Andy young master, unknowingly hurt his feelings. Andy, with a hint of resentment in his voice, expressed his displeasure that Roro didn't use the warmer, more intimate address of brother. Andy, though, was sympathetic to her embarrassment, assured her with a smile that he would wait patiently for the day when she could call him brother. He expressed it with such sincerity and warmth that Roro, feeling a wave of embarrassment and at the same time gratitude for his understanding, couldn't help but agree with his words. Andy, sensing the moment, jumped up determinedly, as if to emphasize the importance of the moment when Roro would finally be able to keep his promise. His actions were full of determination and anticipation, which added a special weight to the moment. And after these words, as if to emphasize his determination and at the same time the ease of their mutual understanding, Andy settled back on the grass, once again immersing himself in the atmosphere of serenity and peace that surrounded them. So in the shade of the trees and under the soft cover of warm sunlight, a quiet dialogue of trust and understanding unfolded between Andy and Roro, emphasizing their interconnectedness and the depth of their feelings for each other at that moment. Roro couldn't help but share her delight at what she was seeing. She noticed how especially beautiful the sky looked at that moment, its extraordinary beauty breathtaking. But when she turned around to share the moment, she found that Andy, drawn to the peace and tranquility of the place, had already fallen into slumber. Confusion enveloped Roro, seeing that her companion had missed such splendor. This moment, however, inspired her to embark on a little adventure. She decided to take the opportunity to look around in the distance and headed along the shore of the huge lake that seemed to stretch all the way to the horizon. Looking for a better view, Roro realized that if she climbed one of the nearby trees, she could see the lake in all its glory. With that thought in mind, she walked over to the tree of her choice and began to climb. But here was the problem. Her new clothes, which were not only beautiful but also expressed her status and personality, were not quite comfortable for this kind of activity. Every upward movement was a reminder that these garments were not made for climbing trees. The moment Roro felt that the safety of her position in the branches of the tree left much to be desired, she concluded that descending to the ground seemed far preferable to the risky continuation of the climb. The girl's heart pounded in unison with every rustle of the forest, and her gaze, sliding downward, suddenly registered the presence of a stranger. Roro's hand shook involuntarily, losing its grip, and then, like a leaf leaving the branch of an autumn tree, it began to fall steadily downward. Panic instantly enveloped her like a cold blanket, displacing rational thought. A scream escaped her throat, a sound of fear and helplessness that cut through the silence of the forest. But then something unexpected happened. The stranger, who until that moment had been merely a silent witness to her distress like a nimble predator, instantly shortened the distance between them. With the unexpected agility and precision one would expect from an experienced acrobat, he managed to pick up Roro, preventing her unfortunate outcome. The moment she was in his arms, their gazes intertwined. Roro, still racked with the remnants of her fright, was embarrassed under his gaze. Her eyes flashed with questions to which she had no answers. Who is this man? Why is he here? And how was he able to come to the rescue so quickly? Gratitude and confusion were intertwined in that look, for though she had been saved from the fall, she now faced the mystery of this stranger whose motives and history remained unknown to her. After her unexpected rescue, Roro turned around to thank her savior, barely feeling the stable ground beneath her feet. It was at that moment that the space around filled with the sounds of footsteps, heralding the arrival of someone else. Roro's heart thudded in anxious anticipation, and realizing that every second counted, she urged the boy to lower her to the ground. Her voice trembled with excitement, reflecting the internal struggle between the desire to stay and the need to hide. As soon as her feet hit the ground, Andy appeared through the green veil of foliage, his face shining with the joy of his newfound confidence that he had finally found Roro. However, the scene quickly turned into drama as Andy's joy was replaced by shock when he saw who was standing next to his girlfriend. There was a look of deep bewilderment and amazement on his face as none other than his own older brother appeared beside Roro. The discovery startled everyone present, including Roro, who until that moment had felt like a character in a sudden drama, was now witnessing an equally sudden and unpredictable development. The situation was filled with tension and anticipation, for the presence of Andy's older brother at her side, at such a moment and in such a place, seemed a complete mystery. Later, the family gathered for a traditional tea party, immersing the garden in an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. This time, as they gathered around the table, they found Yus among them, whose sudden appearance at home was a complete surprise to all. To the surprise of everyone present, Yus, easily cutting through the tense atmosphere with his calmness, admitted that he had not announced his arrival in advance, preferring to surprise the family with his sudden appearance. He explained that his early return was motivated by a desire to get Andy out of the woods, but an equally important reason was his great curiosity to meet his new sister. Those words brought a wave of embarrassment to Roro, who was already overwhelmed with feelings of shyness. Unable to bear the attention directed at her, she turned away from Yus, hiding her face with her hands as if trying to find refuge from his penetrating gaze. As the tea party continued, the Duchess, possessed of undeniable grace and majesty, raised her voice to introduce Yus for Roro. She announced his full name as Julius Cesar El Marquez, emphasizing his status as the firstborn in the family. This introduction made Roro think about how much Yus resembled the Duke, their father. Her reflection on Yus's face, which reflected the obvious resemblance to his father, added another layer of depth to the evening atmosphere, already filled with warm conversation and the aroma of freshly brewed tea. As the fragrant steam of tea floated gently over the table, Andy, watching everyone enjoying their cup, noticed that Roro, their half-sister, remained aloof from the ritual. His voice, imbued with genuine concern, cut through the silence. "Why doesn't Roro drink anything?" This question caused some surprise to Yus, who was hearing the nickname Roro for the first time, and he couldn't hide his surprise. Andy did not hesitate to clarify that this was how they should address their new sister, making it clear that the name was a symbol of his warm feelings for her. However, this nickname was nothing new to Yus, as he had once been called that himself. This unexpected connection to the past put the Duke in an awkward situation, and he hastened to justify himself by saying that the nickname simply had a pleasant sound. Yus, possessing nobility of soul and breadth of heart, nodded graciously, acknowledging that he himself would begin to call his sister Roro, which unwittingly added to her embarrassment. Roro, faced with this unexpected situation, felt awkward. In her heart, she was anxious to introduce herself to Yusu properly, wanting to be at her best. However, this whole whirlwind of events surrounding her nickname and the sudden attention to her person was stressing her out and making her feel even more withdrawn. In the atmosphere of a warm family tea party, when the conversations had died down a little, Andy, always full of ideas and initiatives, decided to add a little joy to the evening by offering Roro a dessert. But his caring gesture went beyond a mere suggestion. He took the liberty of bringing a piece of cake directly to her lips, leaving no room for hesitation. The surprise and taste of the sweetness instantly lit up Roro's face, and now she began to enjoy the dessert herself with gusto, discovering new shades of flavor and joy. Meanwhile, the Dukes could not hide their delight at the scene. Their gazes, full of parental pride and tenderness, followed Roro's every movement, while she, absorbed in the cake, suddenly noticed his attention. Misunderstanding flashed in her eyes, for she could not fathom what exactly had caused such a reaction. When Roro's gaze slid to Yus, her older brother, she felt a little out of place under his stern gaze. This moment added to her nervousness, for she wasn't sure how to behave properly in front of such an authoritative family member. She turned to Andy for support, hoping that he could diffuse the situation, and Andy didn't fail. With his inherent lightheartedness and desire to make everyone happy, he suggested that after the meal we play a game of some sort, in an effort to strengthen the family bond and make the evening even more memorable. Amid the quiet and measured tea party, which seemed to be completely absorbed in domestic comfort and warmth, the sudden appearance of the butler brought a note of surprise into the Duke's family circle. With the dignity befitting his status, the servant turned to the head of the household to announce the arrival of the unexpected guest. The Duchess's look of surprise and slight confusion reflected the general mood. After all, they rarely had guests in their home without prior announcement. While their children, absorbed in childish fun and games with food, hardly paid attention to what was happening, only Yus, the youngest of those present, watched the developments with interest and some thoughtfulness. When the butler importantly pronounced the name of the arrival, Marquis Sophia, accompanied by her daughter, the atmosphere in the hall became even more tense. The Marquise Sophia at this very time stepped down from the foot of her carriage, her graceful figure and expression showing a slight perplexity. After looking around and not finding her brother in the immediate vicinity, she turned to the servants to inquire about his whereabouts. Hearing that the Duke was in the garden, busy drinking tea, the Marquise did not conceal her surprise. It was uncharacteristic of her brother to engage in such leisure activities, especially in the company of guests, which suggested an unusual reason for their visit. That suggestion only fueled her curiosity. At the same time, her young daughter, without wasting time, in a demanding tone, forced the maid to reveal the details of the current moment, which added another touch to the overall picture of unexpected visits and secret plot lines that unfolded that day in their house. Thus, in this whirlwind of events, each of the characters played his part, contributing to the general intrigue and anticipation of the denouement, which, no doubt, promised to be as unexpected as the very appearance of the Marquise Sophia on the doorstep of the Duke's house. Soon after Marquise Sophia had finished her dialogue with the servants, she made her way to the garden, where a gathering of the Duke's family was already waiting for her. As she walked through the lush greenery and flowering alleys, she didn't hide her anticipation of seeing her nephews, whose faces she didn't get to see as often as she would have liked. With excitement in her voice and genuine joy in her eyes, she announced her arrival, expressing her hope of being able to spend time with the younger generation of her kind.